This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real events. Names, dates, locations, and identifying details have been changed or dramatized to protect privacy and enhance the narrative. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental or used fictitiously. This content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not aim to glorify crime, promote violence, or pass judgment on real individuals. Viewer discretion is advised. Some scenes may contain mature, disturbing, or triggering content. What you are about to watch could have happened anywhere, to anyone. It's inspired by real events. Whispers of truth buried beneath layers of fiction. We've changed the names, the dates, the locations, but the emotions, the betrayal, the fear, those are real. This story is not meant to accuse, only to reveal, to make you question, who do you really trust? If stories like this keep you thinking, long after they end, hit subscribe, smash like, and drop your theory in the comments. Now watch closely, before the truth disappears again.
The convent was still. Candles burned low against stone walls, their smoke curling like whispers in the air. Morning light slipped through narrow windows, pale and gray, brushing across wooden pews. The sisters moved quietly, rosaries clicking in rhythm, a sanctuary locked in routine. Then came the sound that did not belong. Engines in the courtyard, doors slamming shut, the heavy tread of boots grinding against gravel, faces turned, curtains shifted. Black SUVs lined the yard, their tinted windows reflecting the crucifix above the chapel roof. The sight was jarring, like a shadow falling across holy ground. And when the men stepped out, their badges caught the morning light. The FBI whispers rippled through the hall. Some clutched their beads tighter, lips moving in half-formed prayers. Others froze, wide-eyed, unable to understand why federal agents had come to a place of vows and silence. They weren't here for the convent. They were here for one of their own. Sister Marianne. She moved slowly toward the door, hands folded, veil drawn close, her face unreadable. To the others, she had always been steady, composed, a woman whose quiet presence carried a strange authority. But now as she stepped forward, something flickered in her eyes. Fear. Then one of the agents spoke. Not the name she wore inside the convent, but the name she had spent years bearing. Elena Hartwell. The name ripped through the chapel like thunder against stone, a sound that could never be taken back. For a moment, the building itself seemed to hold its breath. Prayers stopped. Beads slipped through trembling fingers. Who was she really? What had she done? And why, after all this time, had the world come for her now? The answers were not in the halls of prayer where she knelt each day. They lay in the life Elena Hartwell thought she had buried forever. And now that life had come to collect her. Before she became Sister Marianne, she was Elena Hartwell, a girl shaped by poverty so deep it carved itself into her bones. Her family lived in a house that barely held together, its roof patched with tar and tin, its walls lined with scraps of newspaper to keep the wind out. Hunger wasn't a visitor in that home. It was a tenant, a shadow seated at their table each night. Elena learned early to stay small, to blend into the background. She wore clothes handed down so many times they seemed to belong to no one. At school, she kept her head lowered, afraid of laughter, afraid of being noticed for what she lacked. Yet behind her silence burned a fragile longing she could never quite extinguish. She wanted to be loved. She wanted to matter. That longing was dangerous and she knew it, so she guarded herself, promising never to give her heart away easily. But when the boy came, tall, smiling, with eyes that seemed to see her, her walls began to crumble. His words were honey. He told her she was beautiful. He told her she was his forever. And Elena believed him. For the first time, she felt chosen. When he held her hand, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't invisible. But when she told him she was pregnant, forever dissolved into silence. The boy disappeared. His vows were nothing but ash. By the time her belly began to show, he was gone. Elena gave birth in silence. No partner at her side. No safety net waiting. Just her and the fragile life in her arms. A son. She whispered his name into the dimly lit room and swore he would never feel the emptiness that had once consumed her youth. That boy became her reason to fight. Through sleepless nights and days of sacrifice, Elena built her world around him. She worked when she could, went without when she had to, and held her pride in the small victories. His laugh, the way his small hand wrapped around hers, the soft sound of his voice calling her Mama. Every moment with him was proof she had a reason to keep going. By the time he was 15, Elena was no longer the abandoned girl defined by loss. She was a mother, scarred by survival but bound to her son with a love fierce, enough to stand against the world, but the hunger for love, the one that had lived in her since childhood, never fully left. It lingered in quiet hours, in the ache of lonely nights when the house grew still. That was when another man appeared. He was older, his presence steady, his words deliberate. Where others dismissed her, he looked at her as if she mattered. He spoke of security, of stability, of a future beyond the grind of struggle. He treated her with a patience she hadn't known in years. At first, Elena resisted. She told herself she needed no one but her boy. Yet piece by piece, the man chipped away at her defenses. Patient, kind, careful in his promises. Against her better judgment, she began to believe. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine that love could heal instead of destroy. But she did not see what waited ahead, because when the betrayal came, it would not come from enemies. It would come from her own blood, and from the man she thought would save her. For a time, Elena Hartwell allowed herself to believe her life was finally turning. The man she had let in seemed steady, grounded, with a future that could anchor hers. He spoke with calm certainty, offered kindness when she doubted herself, and carried the promise of stability she had never known. At first, his presence eased her. She no longer felt entirely alone in the burden of survival. With him in the house, there was laughter at the table again, a warmth she had thought impossible. For a woman who had spent years defined by struggle, it seemed like she had finally found her way out. But love, especially the fragile kind built on scars, is never free of shadows. The first crack appeared small, a word said too sharply, a look that lingered too long, questions about her past asked not with care, but with suspicion. She told herself not to read into it, that every relationship carried its frictions. Yet the unease settled in her chest, heavy and persistent. Then came her son, 15, restless and growing into his own defiance. Elena had spent years clinging to him as her reason for living, but now he seemed to be drifting. His silences stretched longer, his eyes turned colder. At times she caught him watching her with something unfamiliar. Not the love of a boy for his mother, but a distance that unsettled her. The man noticed it too. He tried to step into the role of mentor, even father. But instead of drawing the boy closer, it only deepened the divide. Their voices clashed, sometimes in whispers behind closed doors, sometimes sharp enough to echo down the hall. Elena stood between them, torn, desperate to keep peace. She told herself it was nothing more than growing pains, a son becoming a man. She convinced herself the tension would pass. But at night when the house was still, she felt something colder. The gnawing sense that her fragile world was beginning to fracture. The man grew secretive. His kindness thinned. He stayed out longer, returning with excuses that sounded rehearsed. Sometimes she caught him studying her, not with affection, but calculation, as if she were part of a plan she didn't know about. Her son changed too. The boy whose laughter once anchored her now spoke in fragments, retreating further each day. When she reached for him, he pulled away. Still, Elena clung to the hope that families endured storms. She told herself that love required patience, that time could smooth even the sharpest edges. But the truth was already there, written in the spaces between words, hidden in glances that lasted too long. The betrayal had already begun, though she could not yet see its full shape. One night, as she sat alone in the dim light of her kitchen, Elena pressed her hands against the table to steady herself. The silence around her felt different now, thick with something unnamed. She told herself it was only fear. But deep down, she knew her family was slipping away, not stolen by strangers, but by the two people she trusted most. The day began quietly, ordinary, the kind of day that gives no warning of what waits at its end. Elena moved through her morning routine, boiling water for coffee, setting out plates, listening for her son's footsteps in the hallway. But the air felt heavy, every sound too sharp, every silence stretched thin. Her son finally appeared, shoulders slouched, eyes distant. He grabbed food without a word, barely looking at her. Minutes later, the man arrived. Footsteps loud against the floorboards, a quick kiss to Elena's cheek, a smile that never reached his eyes. At first, it was only small things. A word spoken too sharply, a glance that lingered too long, questions that felt less like curiosity and more like suspicion. She told herself not to dwell on it, but unease settled in her chest like a stone. By midday, the house no longer felt like hers. Tension crackled in every corner. Her son muttered under his breath, the man's voice rising in response. Their arguments grew sharper, heavier, dragging her into the middle. She begged for peace, her words thin against the weight of their anger. And then it happened. She opened a door, and what she saw stopped her breath. Her son, and the man she thought she could trust. Together. The world dropped out from under her feet. The walls seemed to close in, pressing her into silence. For a moment she could not move, could not speak. Her mind screamed, but no sound left her mouth. The betrayal was complete. Her son, the boy she had carried, nursed, sacrificed for. The man, the one who promised stability, who swore he would never leave. Both of them bound together in the most devastating way imaginable. Elena staggered back, her chest tight, her hands trembling. Memories came in flashes, her son's first steps, his laughter in the dark, the weight of his small hand in hers, the man's gentle words, the promises she had dared to believe. All of it collapsed in an instant. Something inside her broke that day. A fracture so deep it split her life in two. Who she had been and who she could never be again. The decision that followed was not born of rage alone. It came from despair, the crushing realization that the two people she had given everything to had left her with nothing. What she chose to do, she did in silence. No witnesses, no explanation. Only the weight of a mother betrayed, a woman undone. When it was over, the house was quiet again. But it was not the peace of forgiveness. It was the stillness that follows ruin. She left the house. She left the life. She left the name Elena Hartwell. In its place, she built a wall of silence, sealed with vows. And behind that wall, the world came to know her only as Sister Marianne. But secrets have a way of clawing back to the surface. And one day, hers would. When Elena Hartwell vanished, there was no warning, no goodbye, only silence. To neighbors and distant relatives, it was as if she had melted into thin air. One day she was there, a mother trying to hold her world together. The next, she was gone. The house she left behind carried its silence like a wound. Curtains stayed drawn, doors closed, rooms emptied of sound. People in the community whispered, but whispers were all they had. Some whispered she had run away with the man. Others claimed she had left town to escape her shame. And a few swore she would never abandon her son unless something darker had happened. The truth was stranger than anything they could imagine. Elena walked away from it all. The house, the memories, the name. In their place, she buried herself in a new identity, Sister Marianne. In the eyes of the church, she was reborn. Her absence stirred questions no one could fully answer. Authorities noticed, at least for a while. Records were checked, inquiries made. Neighbors remembered her, but none could explain why she left. Her son, once the center of her world, offered no explanation. His words were few, his face unreadable. The man, too, slipped into shadows. His presence grew less frequent, his gaze colder. If anyone suspected him, he never gave them the chance to ask. He carried on as if Elena had never existed. With no body, no evidence, and no crime officially proven, interest waned. Elena became another name on a list, a missing mother, a story unfinished. Life moved on for those around her, but within convent walls, she rebuilt herself vow by vow. Sister Marianne's devotion impressed everyone who met her. She carried herself with a calmness that silenced rooms. To outsiders, She was the very image of faith, humble, obedient, untouchable. But beneath the veil, she carried the weight of what she had buried. Still, the whispers never vanished. Her disappearance left fractures in memory, questions without answers. Law enforcement, too, never fully closed her file. Thin as it was, it remained open, marked by suspicion and silence. The FBI never forgets a name, and in their files, Elena Hartwell's name still waited, tied to a vanished mother, a silent house, and questions that refused to die. For years, Elena Hartwell believed her past was safe. As Sister Marianne, she hid behind vows, silence, and a calm authority no one dared question. Within the convent, her name was spoken with respect. But outside those stone walls, her real name never disappeared. It sat quietly in files marked unresolved. The FBI does not forget. It began with a review, a cold case investigator leafing through records, piecing together fragments. A mother gone, a house abandoned, a son who never spoke, a man who faded into shadows. None of it had ever fit neatly into place. What started as curiosity hardened into suspicion. The file was reopened, witnesses tracked down, old neighbors questioned again. Rumors once dismissed as gossip now sounded like warnings. The trail led them to a convent, to Sister Marianne. When the agents arrived, the sisters could not believe it. The woman who had led prayers, who had tended their gardens, who had carried herself with such serenity, could she truly be the same Elena Hartwell the FBI had come to find? The investigation unraveled slowly at first. Financial records, timelines, inconsistencies. The life of Sister Marianne was spotless, but the life of Elena Hartwell was riddled with questions. Why had she vanished? What became of her son? Where had the man gone? The agents pressed. Elena sat in small rooms, her hands folded neatly, her gaze steady, but cracks showed in her silence. Questions about her son made her flinch. Mentions of the man darkened her face. The silence she had carried for nearly 2 decades could not withstand direct confrontation. And then came the evidence. Neighbors recalled nights when voices rose too sharp, too heavy, to be dismissed as ordinary quarrels. Some remembered seeing her leave in haste, her steps hurried, her face pale. Others described the son, strange, withdrawn, speaking in clipped tones whenever his mother was mentioned. The man's past was examined too. His movements after Elena's disappearance, his sudden withdrawal from the community, his cold detachment whenever her name arose. Piece by piece, the fragments formed a picture darker than anyone had dared to imagine. The truth did not arrive in a single confession. It came like threads pulled from a tightly wound fabric. Forensics, testimonies, contradictions that could no longer be explained away. In court, prosecutors told the story of a mother betrayed, a woman broken, a decision born of despair. They argued she had buried her ruin in silence, then remade herself in the cloth of faith. The defense painted her as misunderstood. A woman pushed past reason, a woman who sought redemption in service. They pointed to her devotion as Sister Marianne, to the lives she touched in her years behind convent walls. But the past was heavier than prayer. When the verdict came, the courtroom was silent. One word: guilty. Elena Hartwell, the woman the world had come to know as Sister Marianne, was sentenced. The calm mask she had worn for so long cracked under the finality of judgment. For the first time in years, she was no longer untouchable. She was human again, broken, exposed, claimed by the truth she had fled. For the community, the revelation was almost impossible to accept. The woman who had lived as a sister of faith was the same woman tied to betrayal, despair, and silence. Vigils were held, prayers whispered, some in her name, others in outrage. But for Elena, the unraveling was complete. The veil was gone, the truth was exposed, and Elena Hartwell's name had returned to claim her. In the end, Elena Hartwell's story was never just about a nun behind convent walls. It was about a girl who grew up hungry for love, a woman who longed to belong, a mother who gave everything to her son, and a betrayal so deep it shattered everything she had built. For nearly 2 decades, she hid behind vows and devotion, her pain disguised as serenity. To those around her, she was Sister Marianne, calm, gentle, untouchable. But behind the veil lived a woman carrying choices too heavy for one soul to bear. The world often imagines betrayal comes from strangers, from enemies, from those far away. Elena's story is a reminder that sometimes the deepest wounds are carved by the people closest to us. Trust can be a gift and a weapon. Her life forces us to ask hard questions. How much can one person endure before they break? How far will someone go to cover a pain they cannot bear to face? And what happens when secrecy itself becomes the crime? Elena Hartwell's name returned, not as a whisper, but as a reckoning. The truth she thought she had buried demanded to be seen. But beyond the courtroom, beyond the convent walls, lies the memory of a woman who was once just a girl, wanting only to be loved. That is what remains. If this story unsettles you, perhaps that is its purpose. To remind us that behind every mask of calm, there may be a story too heavy to carry alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this should never be forgotten, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Because behind every silence lies a story, and some are still waiting to be uncovered.